Welcome, everybody, to another week of Real Talk Food Safety with Jill and Tia.
Hello, everyone. We're super excited for you to be here today because we are talking about something that Jill and I, we love it, right? Like we love talking about the topic we're going to talk about today around EQ and Enneagrams. And we're super excited about sharing this with you all today.
Yep. And sharing, you see our special guest, Jenn Whitmer, which we're going to have her introduce herself in a little bit. But as people are joining us, we always ask, drop in the comments, be part of the community with us. Where are you at today? And because it's our month of gratitude, what or who are you appreciating today?
Yeah. Yes. So add that in the comments because we can see it. We can see your questions. We can see your comments. And we love having you a part of this talk.
We do. Yeah. And today, I appreciate that we have our first snowfall. I'm over in Minnesota. Jenn, I think, you're in a different time zone. So
no, I'm in Central Time.
You are. Okay. I was thinking you were, but then for some reason I thought
too.
But I appreciate it because everything seems very calm after the snow falls and everything's quiet.
Yeah, the picture you sent me was beautiful. It was beautiful. I'm in Baltimore and we don't have any snow. It's been really, really cold. And I like to avoid the snow, but when snow happens, it's just so pretty to me. So I appreciate you sending me that photo because it was beautiful. Yeah. As I think about gratitude, I'm counting down the days to when my family come to me for the holidays. And, typically I'm the one that's traveling for the holidays. I'm the only one. So I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm the only one who lives away. And so I'm typically the one traveling home. But this year is my daughter's first Christmas. And so I'm having everyone come to me. I kind of said, hey, she needs to have Christmas at home, right? So trying to pull the only grandchild string. And so, my family's is going to come up here for the holidays. And so I'm excited about that. I'm counting down the days to when we're together and we're getting the matching PJs and all these things. Yeah, we've been doing that for the past couple of years. My mom goes out and get them and stuff. And so we just got them. And so the excitement is there. And then just watching my daughter experience, family and, they all love her and can't wait to see her. So I'm really, I'm grateful for family and I'm looking forward to it. And just, the holidays always just makes me happier.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. Jenn, I know we didn't even talk about this, to prep, but is there anything you'd like to share with the audience?
I love that. So I am actually have a similar thing. I'm excited that my family is coming home. So my kids are much older. I have 2 in college and 2 at home, but one of them is studying abroad in England this year. So he is coming home for Christmas and I'm very excited about that. So it'll be fun to see him in real life and not just on Be Real. And so I'm really, really excited about that. I'm really grateful. Super long story short, my husband's been in a job transition and I'm just really grateful for the place we're at and the health that we have. And that is not to be taken for granted. I mean, even some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, seeing that come to fruition in our lives of we don't have to live in the rat race has been just really lovely and unexpected in some ways. Oh, this really works. And so which has been lovely.
Yeah. I like that you're bringing this up even because we talk with people all the time and it's so hard to just get started and to stick with the process. But when you come out on the other end, which is now what it seems like you're experiencing, where it's oh, wow, this is working. I'm so glad I stuck with it.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh. Well, today is going to be a treat having you with us, Jenn, and right, because we're going to talk about conflict and self-awareness and Enneagrams. And For our audience, like, Tia and I nerd out over these topics, and we're going to do that with Jenn today too. So
yes, absolutely. And if this is your first time with us, hello, welcome to Real Talk. Jill and I, this is what we do weekly, but we're also in your lives and in your space when it comes to technical leadership development. We have programs that are coaching based to help you transform from the experts in your field to really the leaders in your organizations. Because, we all talk about food safety culture and what it takes to get us to where we need to be. And we really have to lead differently in order for us to get there. Like, I'm looking at you, the people that's been in food safety for so long. We've been on this road. And even as we just talked about, like, staying the course and using things that work, right? At the end, it's going to be worth it. And the path that we've been going down, hasn't really been fruitful for us to get to where we need to be. And it's because we've been living with data and science, and that's not really connecting people to the word culture. And so, what Jill and I do is we really focus on that intersection between technical and leadership and how you can use that to push your culture forward. So we're excited you're here.
Very much. And leadership starts with self-awareness, because we can never effectively lead and influence if we don't know ourselves, right? We try and we get part way, but to really be effective, it helps to really reflect and be introspective for ourselves to know what our drivers are and why we do things and how we improve. And so today, Jenn is going to give us some new perspectives around these areas. So instead of listening to us, let's go to Jenn and would you share? Because I'm sure there's people in our audience who may not be familiar with you. Would you start with even introducing yourself, and how did you find this path?
Absolutely. Well, as I said earlier, I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, so I'm a Midwestern gal, and I've noticed that nobody has told us where you're from. I want to know where you're from. I love it. It's like my favorite thing about lives, about where all the people at South Texas. Thank you, Marcel. Anyway, so here is a little bit of my story. So I grew up in the Midwest. I always wanted to be a teacher. And so I had really early, great leadership training that I brought into my educational career, and loved being a faculty leader. And then I had 3 kids in 3 years. And so teaching was just a real challenge. And then I had another one. So I ended up staying home for a little bit. But when I went back into administration at my kids' school. That was this beautiful private school with an amazing culture that we built, that was caring and high academic standards and a diverse location. And we just had all of these amazing things. And I was loving my job. I mean, I really was like, I think this is my dream job. I got to lead teachers. I got to help parents understand data. And I always kind of joke, if I can help parents understand statistics and they're laughing, then I'm doing something that's really meaningful. Yes. I love these people. They're in Chicago and Colorado, Texas. Thank you. That just makes my heart happy. And so I really loved this work. And I had probably one of the best leaders I had served under. And he, as many great leaders do, went off to serve someplace else. And we had an interim year that was challenging, and then a new leader come in that was unskilled and unhealthy and really devastated our culture to the point where it became a toxic and then moved into an abusive environment. And it's taken me a lot of work to even label it as such. That's very hard. Because I have never had an abusive relationship. I was like, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just that kind of word. And that's not how that works when you end up in a toxic culture. And it was incredibly damaging, not only to me as an individual, but as a school community. And it was even more hard because my kids were there. I mean, by that point, not all of them were there, but it was really devastating. My friends, my community that we'd been a part of for 10 years, 15 years was now suddenly we're all walking around like shells. It was just awful. And I can remember one night sitting on my gray couch and just tears, like, you know, the ugly cry. Please tell me the ugly cry, the ugly cry. And I'm just like, why am I doing this? I should never have been a leader. Like, I have no business leading. That's the place that I had gotten to after 20 years of tons of leadership experience.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was when I was like, okay, I have to figure out something that lets me be fully me, but also not ignore the parts of me that aren't being helpful here. And that was this tension moment. And so I had been introduced to the Enneagram way back in college, but it was on like a mimeograph sheet. So if you're in the comments and you know what a mimeograph is, I would just, please let me know. Like, put a purple heart or something, because you know it's purple. And it was on this like mimeograph sheet, and it had all these big scary words on it, like lust and gluttony, or you know, like, I'm like, what is envy? I was so terrified, and I was like, no, thank you. You can keep that. That is not for me. But 20 some years on, after sitting and bawling about who am I, a friend mentioned it and was like, I think this would be really helpful for you. And she was right. And so really digging into understanding my own self, and love that smell. Thank you, Sharon. The mimeograph smell. Understanding my own self, and then gave me the ability to start to understand what was happening around me. So the thing I have come to realize that I did not know at the time, but what true self-leadership, and that's what I call it, when we can't lead other people until we lead ourselves first. True self-leadership requires ruthless self-honesty and radical self-compassion. And those two things have to go together. They have to go together in order to lead ourselves. And so in that moment, I could then develop this self-honesty and self-compassion. And the way those two things are held together is with curiosity. So I could then become curious about others. I could become curious about, why is this leader actually quantifiably terrible? You know, like, why is that happening? Like, all the data shows, you know, but what's there? What compassion? And there was so much that became available that did not excuse his behavior. I ended up getting fired and rehired for this really weird role. And then I ended up leaving. And so there was this whole bit of drama. But in that time, I started really digging into conflict, because that was the presenting injury. So a lot of difficult cultures, a lot of unhealthy cultures experience higher levels of unhealthy conflict. And then also digging into what about me isn't working here real well? What about me is not meshing with where my ideal is or what my values are? And that really helped. So, as all teachers do, I went back to school, and
it's the natural path.
It's the natural path. That's what we do. Why not get a third master's? I mean, come on. I studied communication and culture and really dug into conflict and communication skills, at the same time really studying the Enneagram, and ended up getting certified in that way, and discovered that while I love teaching, and then when I do speaking events, it's like this moment of openness, the way to make it stick is coaching. And so that was where the coaching aspect came. So that's how I became a speaker, and really helping teams and leaders figure out, how do I even solve this conflict? How do I cultivate healthy communication and really create empowered teams so everybody gets to do their work? Because that's what we want. We want to be, it's not like we're all just kumbaya around, although 6th grade camp was my favorite activity as a teacher. So I'm happy to sit around a campfire. Yes. We have work to do. You know, you all are working in processing and other kinds of places where we need food safety. I want food to be safe. You know, and it's really important work. And if what's blocking you is unhealthy culture, and what's blocking you is unhealthy and unproductive conflict, your good work doesn't get done. So that's my long story of how I got into this.
I love that. You know, there's two things that really stood out to me. And there's a lot of things, but two things. One is like when you talk about teaching and coaching, and we say this here, people who are with us and have been with us, they know this, where you know, teaching is one thing, but I love the way you said it. Coaching makes it stick.
Mhm.
We do a lot of training in food safety and quality, a lot of training in food safety and quality, but we haven't been able to see the results that we think we should be getting from training. It's one of the reasons why our programs are coaching based, is because coaching is what actually makes it stick, which leads to that culture change.
Absolutely.
So
Because
I love
culture
that.
change isn't like, the way we change a culture has to start with people, because cultures are not built by the machines around us.
Right.
That's not culture. Those are artifacts. Those are tools.
Yes.
Culture is built by people. And when we have a healthy culture, it means there are people inside that are healthy and working on themselves. And then there are healthy processes that help people interact in healthy ways. I know I just used healthy like 82 times, but that's the track.
Yes.
You can't just jump to, oh, we're going to have a healthy culture without working on any people.
Right.
Because I know all of y'all might actually work with robots, but they're not the only things you work with.
Or computers, right?
Got to work on the people.
Yeah. And then that brings me to the second point, is people. You know, you were in a great culture, and a person came in, right? And then all of a sudden the culture changed. And it probably didn't happen like, oh, this person onboarded and day 2 culture is like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You know, it probably happened over time where it's like, oh, there's a, you know, a sour apple. There's something happening in our culture that's getting it to shift. And before you know it, like you said, you're in a toxic work environment, you're in an abusive relationship at work, you know, like these things are starting to happen. And it's not as easy to say like, well, just change jobs. Right. And like we talk about all the time is that, you know, your manager, a lot of times we say your manager or a leader in the organization could be causing, like you said, this conflict in culture that's not helping it push forward. And if you are not taking time to invest in your managers, in your leaders, right, so that they're not creating these toxic environments, you could end up in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, or I think even like you said, the awareness.
And
I think, how do we cultivate the curiosity? And maybe this will go into part of this, but I think as leaders, and people have heard my story, right? Like I thought I was a pretty good leader, right? I too did the path of like moving up, and you gain some skills and you get promoted, until that one day I was like, oh, I need help. Otherwise, without having a situation that actually put me in that moment of like, whoa, I need some help here, I would have sat and been in a situation where essentially I was kind of like over my head.
Yeah.
And knowing that I would probably work through it, but that was like going through the mud. So I'm curious, like, as you work with people, because really what I needed to do was get out of my own way and get out of my team's way. And understand that. But also then break out of this story where I was essentially desensitized to the things around me that I was just responding to. Like, oh, well, it's always been like that here, or that's just how that person is, or this is what I deserve. So I know I just threw a whole pile out there, Jen, but I'm sure you've got some thoughts around like, how do we get into that, and how do we move out of it?
Yeah. So I mean, when we talk about failure, I think sometimes we feel like that's a devastating place. And even Marcel is like, failure is the greatest teacher. And I agree. Failure is the greatest teacher, even when you wish you were in a different class, you know, like it really is this space, but failure is also part of the process. Sometimes we do so much work to avoid failure that it actually we get in our own way. As you said, Jill, you know, like I'm now in my own way because I'm doing so much extra work to avoid the failure. So when we talk about that, how do we break that down? You know, we all love a model. I'm sure all of you very fun data technical people love a model. So I have a little model. So you're just going to imagine like a quadrant. The favorite business model ever is the quadrant. And so this is called the Johari window because a man named Johari came up with it. But I love using the Johari window as an introduction into what self-awareness really is, and then understand where do we go from there. So in this Johari window over here, you've got the top is what's known to you, and what's down the side is what's known to others. So if that quadrant over here is what's obvious to you and obvious to me, Jenn Whitmer talks with her hands. She laughs really loudly. Nobody's confused about that. I know you all have spent 10 minutes with me. You know, it's in the open. We call that section open. And because it's in the open, we can then do something about it. We now have awareness around, oh, this is the thing. Let's keep doing that thing. It's fine that I laugh aloud. I do need to know when to do it. You know, like but it's in the open and somebody can coach me. I can be aware of that. I can develop a skill. It's in the open. Well, then if I go across and like, this is what is hidden from me, but it's clear to others. Other people can see it. And we call that a blind spot. We all have blind spots. None of us, I mean, even though as a teacher, I used to joke, I have eyes in the back of my head, and some of my children still believe that. I don't actually, you know, so we've all got a blind spot. And the way to get out of blind spot, you can't work on things in the blind spot because you can't see them. Like
they're unknown,
visible to you. So you have to move to open. And the way to get out of blind spot to open is feedback. Another great way to get from blind spot to open is what I would call typical personality tools. So things that show you a little bit more about what and how you live in the world. So those would be Strengths Finders, DISC, Myers-Briggs, even Colby. Like those kind of show you how you exist in the world that you might not totally be aware of. They label those things for you. And getting really good feedback around that from people that are invested in you and want your best, that brings us into open. And now we can do something about it. So then we move down on the quadrant and we go to what's hidden from others, but clear to you. Like, you know, when you sent that email that you were trying to be snarky, but cover it up. You know.
Did you see my email? No, I'm kidding.
You know.
We've all done that.
We're having that you missed that step or whatever. You know, like you knew what's internally motivating you or what internally was going on. I'm scared to talk to that person because I'm afraid of this XYZ result. All of that. If you take some time, you like, oh, that is what's happening for me, but you can't do something about it. Back to what Jill and I were talking about being stuck. Like I needed some help. I needed some outside. I couldn't do it anymore just on my own. I had exhausted my skills and I needed something. Well, I have to get to open in order to get that help again. And so to get from, we call that the facade, when I know what's inside of me, but others don't. Facade to open is self-disclosure. So, hey, here's what I'm struggling with. Would you be willing to help me? I noticed this about myself. Here is what I would like to improve. You know, like that is self-disclosure. I'm not talking about bearing your deepest, darkest soul at work, but giving an idea of, I know that this is a problem for me. You might not know that it's a problem for me. And so I would appreciate some support with that. Or here's what I'm doing because I know that this is a problem. Here's what I'm doing to address that. And I want you to be aware of it for accountability because I know that you are interested in my growth or whatever, you know, that self-disclosure. Over here, we've got this scary little place where it's hidden from us and it's hidden from others. And we call that the unknown. And what do we do with that? Like, how do we move to open from there? That is where I love the Enneagram. So the Enneagram is a personality framework that is different than Myers-Briggs and Colby and DISC because it's digging not just at the what and the how you do life, but the underneath why. What's motivating my thoughts and feelings and actions? And sometimes those things are very hidden from us. We're not actually aware that, oh, that's what I'm doing. Oh, that's why this is happening for me. I didn't realize that was the story I was telling myself. And the Enneagram helps identify those narratives. And other people don't know why you're doing it either. They just see your behavior.
It's just part of part of our story. Like you said, we've done it so often that that's just what we believe is true. And that's what we believe is true.
Right. And so when the Enneagram can show us, oh, here's what's motivating me at a very core level. I'm not talking like I'm motivated because I love to travel. And so I want to get that bonus, or I really want to spend more time with my family. So I want flexible work. All of that is super valuable. The Enneagram is digging into, I feel like I'm not worthy if I don't succeed. I feel like I'm not safe if I don't know everything. I feel like I'm going to get blamed, like really deep motivations in who we are. That brings us to the facade. And then from facade, we can move to open and we can do something about it. So that's how I like to start with self-awareness. And the way you do that is curiosity. It's like, I wonder what I am believing about myself. I wonder how this could show up. I'm noticing this. I wonder what's underneath that, rather than the shame and blame and the internal Regina George of, oh, you should just be better at this. I should just know.
Right.
We all, I mean, I'm assuming if you're listening, you are human and you have experienced that, because we all do.
Yeah.
So that's the replacement of curiosity helps that unknown space to get curious about it, rather than it being a place that we shun away from.
I love that. I don't think I've ever heard someone explain Enneagram using the Johari window. Like, so, you know, that was really interesting. And to think about too, that you want to know what's in that unknown bucket. And for people that haven't done the Johari window, we can share a link to it. It's free. It's online.
It's not a Jenn Whitmer model.
So, you know, we can get you, we'll add a link at the end of this. But it's interesting because a lot of people see that unknown bucket and they're like, oh, it's not showing up. It's unknown to me. It's unknown to you. No one's talking about it. So let's just leave it in that space. But in reality, it is still impacting us. It's just, we just don't see it. You don't see it.
Well, we see it, but we don't know what's at the root. So we have this crazy tree in our backyard. I don't know what this thing is, but it is some kind of weed that we cannot I mean, like, it's a tree weed. It's not a nice tree. And so we can't figure out where the root is. Like, we've recently kind of figured out, but before then we're like, what is this thing? Why does it keep popping up? Because it doesn't look like, it sort of looks like the tree that's next to it, but not really. And you don't really know. So what's happening in the unknown is so deep that we still notice the impact of it. We still notice that it comes out as gossip or triangulated communication or procrastination or it comes out. We're just not getting at the root. And so we have to pull it out by the root, which, by the way, it was a weird poke weed and we figured it out and we pulled it out by the root. We found it.
But I think even with your tree story, right, there's these layers of evaluation and research and understanding that guide us or get us to that place to know those other things. So even in the Johari window, if we're in the unknown, like the unknown, lots of layers there probably. But even in those spaces of, even when we're all aware, even if it's in the open, there's still sometimes layers for us to understand the why. And we may have awareness, but even understanding how to process it. There's
I always wish that I had better schematic, like, drawing abilities, because I don't actually think of the Johari window as flat. I think of it as a cube. And so your layers in there make so much sense. And because it's not just one thing, because sometimes everything's out in the open, but we have different opinions how the impact is addressing other people. Like, everybody's aware, but I don't agree that the impact is what you agree the impact is. What we do with that, you know, so like, it's so layered in every one of those quadrants.
You know, and sometimes I think it's even things that, I mean, it doesn't have to be like something huge. So for example, I remember on a team, like when we would have a team meeting, there was always one person, one of my team members, who would just go quiet. And we were always like, gosh, do they not want to participate? Or does this make them uncomfortable? And they were like, you know, but we didn't ask. We kind of made a story up in our head about what it was. And then one day, finally, when we, you know, were talking about it, this person was like, well, no, I just, that's my thinking time. And so sometimes it's something as easy as that, just asking a question, but even moving into that, because sometimes that's where we have that perceived conflict of, well, how do I ask this question? How do I have this conversation that seems tough? But it can be deeper things too. But
absolutely.
How
Well, there's so much impact to that. I think about, again, what's out in the open is I'm a generally jovial person. And I have a fairly resting, happy face. But when I am thinking, you all experienced this earlier, I looked really intense and angry because we were offline at the beginning and then I was doing something else while we were waiting. And I have this thinking face where I am concentrating. But because it's so different than my normal affect, people assume that I'm angry. And so I've had to learn to say, I look really intense right now because I'm really listening and trying to understand you.
Yes.
That changes the conversation because now I'm bringing out into the open what everybody can see, but I know what's self-disclosing. Hey, I've become aware that I don't really have an RBF, but I have a face that's intense for some other people.
Yes. Yeah. And you also have to think about it. I think that's a really good example because, even I've run into times in my career where people always see me happy that they think that I can't be serious. So like it's the stories that people tell themselves on like, well, I don't think you can deliver a serious conversation. And I remember having that conversation with someone and the conversation that I was having it with, like they haven't actually seen me have a serious conversation. There was really no need for them to see me have a serious conversation. But it's like one of those things where, you have to think about and be aware of and say, oh, this is the story that people tell themselves because they see how optimistic I am. How can I help shape that by bringing forward when I am being serious, when I've had serious conversations? Sometimes it's just like, oh, I had this serious conversation and this is how we move forward. This is the feedback that I got of, I feel great when we have these conversations because you're so positive, So it's like, it's something where there's meaning in bringing some things to the forefront into that open space, right? That you might understand, but other people don't.
One of the things that I help my coaching clients, so I have also Catalyst, I call it the Catalyst Leadership Lab, but I also do a keynote around stories. And I call it, because, we all have to market things, rewriting the self-doubt soundtrack. But it's really about connected leadership and thriving teams. And it's all about storytelling. It's all about how we tell stories about ourselves and we tell stories about other people. So if I'm doing that, so is my team. And so how do we start to identify stories that we tell ourselves? And not all stories are bad. It's how we're wired as humans. We are wired as narrative beings in order to create meaning. We want to make meaning of everything. That's how I live and exist in the world. And so what I love using the Enneagram for, and when I'm doing this training and working with clients, it's the Enneagram has some shortcut stories we all tell ourselves. And so if I can just be aware that, oh, right, that's the story I'm always going to reach for at that deep motivation level, it's like the super train, that helps me get to, oh, that's the meaning I'm trying to create in that space. And so what is that meaning true? Can I adjust that? Am I assuming this about other people? Like I have one particular personality type that if I start feeling something from somebody, I have to really fight. I'm like, oh, they're an unhealthy that number. I'm like, that's not helpful because I am now telling a story about them that may or may not be true rather than leading with curiosity and connection. And so the stories and the meaning that we create, when we start to understand the depth of the Enneagram, we start to have some common shared language and some, grease in the wheels that helps us operate more smoothly together because we're not spending as much time. We're just so much more skilled at identifying the meaning that we create that our personalities are trying to tell us.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And then obviously the Enneagram is really stepping into this space of EQ, right? It lives in that space. And I want to talk a little bit, dive deep into the navigating conflict. And you brought it up in your story early on, you really noticed that when this manager came in or this leader came in, that there was some conflict that was really driving that toxic culture. So I would love for you to kind of, tell us, how can we use Enneagram to really identify conflicts that we're having, even if, you know, it shows up like, wow, this is a toxic work culture.
Yeah.
How do we really identify that there's a conflict happening, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to back up a little bit and like just define conflict and how I define conflict. So while I'm doing that, I would love for y'all to put in the chat what you know about the Enneagram. Like if you're still at Ennea what, or I've heard of this thing, or I know my number, just tell us in the chat where you are, and that will help me when I get to the Enneagram part. So when I back up, and this is how I define conflict. Conflict is the struggle, this struggle between limited resources and differing goals. Mm-hmm. So conflict is the struggle, the in-between between limited resources and differing goals. So when we talk about resources, there are really about 4 buckets. There's time, money, people, and space. Everything kind of falls into one of those categories.
Right. And we understand that, being in food safety and quality. We understand those 4 buckets.
Yeah.
Very well. Too well sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I always think that time is the most limited resource, but we do genuinely have money resource issues. There's not enough people to do the work, or the relationships and then space. How do I live in this space that we have? And I am sure in food safety, how big a machine takes up, the size of a warehouse, like all of that can be so limited, and you have to limit within that. So we recognize that there's these limited resources, but then we've got differing goals. Like, how do we spend those limited resources? That's where that conflict comes in. So the goals can be values misalignment. The goals can be lack of clarity around the goal. That can be it. So people bring their own stuff. But the deeper issue is everybody is always fighting for belonging, safety, and love. And when we're looking for belonging, safety, and love, that's what the Enneagram is showing us how we're trying to get there. So the Enneagram goals are underneath all of that. So when you show up in conflict, you're always trying to get something out of that space. And so when you come to the struggle of limited resources and differing goals, being aware of your goal is how you help make that struggle productive. And so the posture that we create is curiosity again, and it's a problem solving posture. So when we're in conflict, I want it to be the 2 of us against the problem out there, rather than us like this. That's the posture of conflict resolution. And that is the posture of conflict resolution all over. Interpersonal, team conflict, culture, how can we together, arm in arm, solve this problem out there? So, okay, we've got Enneagram, new to me. Humor is my default. Me too, Sharon.
I know we have to laugh in food safety, right?
Yeah.
Or we cry.
I know.
Right. It's either laugh or cry, which Sharon, absolutely, my food safety team have been like, why are you laughing? And really there was a team where we were like the laughing, cackling bunch. Like, you heard laughing in the office, it came from someone on the food safety team.
How dare you have fun in food safety?
I mean,
right, exactly.
Listen, I am here for it. I am here for it. So when we work into the Enneagram, I'm not going to do the whole. So the Enneagram is worked into 9 different personality types. I'm not going to spin around the whole circle of all 9. Instead, I'm going to choose the 3 conflict styles, and you can kind of identify yourself within there. And I'll throw the numbers that are in those 3 groups, but that will help people, because it seems like everybody's like, oh, I'm kind of new at it, latch on a little bit easier. It's like a 0 gravity pool. We're just going to ease ourselves in. So when you show up in conflict, whatever the problem is, there's 3 different styles that we all grab to, but one of them is like, that's the one I'm going to grab first until I learn something different. And so the first style I call the dynamites. So the dynamites are the people who are Enneagram 4, 6s, and 8s. And kind of the catchphrase is, aren't you upset about this? There's kind of this immediate reaction. And sometimes it can be really overwhelming. And what's happening is they are connecting to the problem as real through their emotions. And it is their first leading thing. Now, I'm going to say something probably controversial in this group, but science backs me up that all decisions are emotional decisions. So we all have emotions that are involved. This group just leads with them. And they're like, this is upsetting. And they are connecting to that problem in that way. On the other side of that, how they show up can be really overwhelming to other people. Like the emotional intensity is like, whoa, I'm not
sure what just happened here.
Yes. I don't totally know how to cope with that. And sometimes it is, instead of an explosion, it's an implosion. Like they just kind of, and they come down. But both of those are dynamite. You know, like when they're tearing down buildings, we don't want them to fall everywhere. We want them to fall in. And so it's both of those are the reactions of the dynamites. And when they're dealing with conflict, what's great about that is they remind us that emotions are involved, and that until we resolve the emotions, we actually can't move on with problem solving. We've got to address them. And that's a gift that the dynamites give us. They struggle. So if you are a dynamite, the thing to know is that emotional reaction, it can block solutions because it's like right up here and now I can't see. And so we want to bring that emotional intensity down, not ignore it, not stuff it away, but just, I literally coach my clients to think about the dial. And I like to use the dial on like an audio board. So, because those go up to like 100 sometimes, and just bring it down to about 60. So you can now see a little bit more. People still recognize your authenticity as a 4. They still are going to try to connect with you as a 6. They still are like, oh, this 8 is upset. Like, and they know that you don't want to be controlled. Like there's still this intensity, but it brings that down enough where you can start to see solutions and other people aren't afraid to engage, because that can be the response on the other side.
That's huge.
I think I might be in this group. I don't know, but I might. But I think one piece of this around, as someone that's in this group, right? When you think about self-awareness, being able to identify that, like feel it, right? I always talk about, like, in order for you to get to a point that you're making decisions that's not, is not in that dynamite space, right? Or it's not, that you're really thinking about what you want to do going forward. You have to first recognize that emotion, which is sort of what we're talking about, in order to move forward. And so for people who feel the emotions either exploding or, withdrawing into themselves, it's so important to be able to say, and this is why we like Enneagrams, to be able to say, oh, this is what I'm feeling. Yeah. This is why I'm feeling this way. This is the layers or the stories that I'm telling myself. And now you're able to turn down the dial based off of what, who your audience is, right? And how you want to influence them, and how you want to have those conversations. Yeah. Now you know a little bit to say, okay, I need to bring this down to a 60, or sometimes I need to bring it way down, because the people that you're talking to, they're not going to respond to passion in that.
We shut them out.
Yeah.
We keep them away because, that emotion can be really powerful, which is also part of the key of, like, look here, there's something happening, right?
Absolutely.
Right. It also can be a lot for others to handle. So I love how you describe that. First, you need to recognize it. That's the self-awareness. But then also, where do you need to shift so that you can move forward? Emotions aren't meant to be stuck.
No,
they're it's emote. Like, you're supposed to move through emotions.
Absolutely. Energy in motion. Like they move through. Yeah. And there's all kinds of skills around EQ and managing your own emotions. And when you are a dynamite in particular, notice that, like, oh, I'm emotionally connected to this first. That's not wrong. That's not right. That's just what it is. So how do I then manage that to make sure, again, that it's the two of us together solving the problem? I'm not like blocking you with so not giving you the hand, as I used to say in high school.
Well, we feel that a lot in food safety, where it feels like it's us against everyone.
Yeah.
And so we often talk about, like, we don't want exactly what you said. We don't want problems between us. We want to be on the same side.
Exactly. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. So then we've got another group in there, and I call them the cool cucumbers. And in our society, Western society in particular, this has been dubbed the way to solve conflict. It is not the only legitimate conflict style, but it is the one that has been elevated in our society. And 1s, 3s, and 5s fit into this category. And they're all about competency. So they're just going to take all of those emotions, and instead of explode or implode, they're going to put them over here in this little bedazzled box. And I'm going to keep them over here. And they're not involved in this at all. And so what are the details? What is the data? What do I need to know? Because the desire for competency is so great that is what they're approaching the conflict for. And they are just cool as a cucumber. What's the data? What do I need to know? It's very in the headspace. And they can forget that their emotions have to be dealt with, because otherwise it becomes Pandora's box and it opens everywhere. So what's great about this group, what they bring to conflict is the details. Like, what's the action step? We've solved this problem. Now what do we do? They're fantastic at coming up with really detailed, like, action items by person. They're really, really good at that, or bringing the data to the table. And that's so valuable, because we have to have shared data to make decisions, but we also have to have the emotions. So sometimes they want to get through it so fast because they feel incompetent in conflict, that they use the data to then feel competent, but it's not actually solving the right problem. So this group, you got to slow down a little bit. And what is the real problem? And you can use lots of different exercises to understand what's the real problem, and then use your superpower of data and action steps to get there.
You know, and once again, I think we see this in food safety, because something comes up and people will say, well, what were the results? Or what is the probability of this happening? What is the actual risk number? And we can use data and logic to say, this is what that is. But I think this is where we're also learning more about food safety culture and our own culture, to say, this may give us some awareness or some guidance, but what should we really be doing? Like, how does this fit with our values? How does this fit with the emotions that actually do drive decision making?
Yeah, I think another way that this shows up for us is that we get into this, think about like corrective action, preventative action, right? We get into this root cause analysis, problem solving, and all of that is great, right? You know, I love the way you explain it. Like, this is what has been elevated.
We're checking the boxes on those. Right,
exactly. We're going through the problem solving. We're saying, okay, what's next? You know, when do we need to do this? And then, like, down the road, we're running into the same problem. And maybe the teams have structured a little bit different. So now we have new leaders coming in, or we have new people working on the floor, and we're seeing the same problems. Like, nothing is sustained, because we've but I mean, we have a beautiful, you know, root cause analysis, and we have a beautiful conversation around it, and we feel great about it at the moment, right? Because we're feeling great that
now I feel competent.
Exactly. We feel confident because we're now competent, because we have those action steps, right?
Absolutely.
We have those action steps. We're ready to go. And then we realize that, you know, it goes back to what we say, like, processes do not equal culture. You know, like, we have the process, we have that, but it does not equal culture. It's not the only thing that you need driving your food safety culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I can imagine, if I'm thinking about and making some generous assumptions about this group, there's probably a lot of 1s and 5s. And so this also probably fits very much with who you all are. And so it can be very hard to see that there is another way, because it's been reinforced by broader business culture. Check your emotions at the door. Everything is data driven, all that kind of stuff.
And I think, like you said, society too, right? In our culture here in general, it's we're not always championed to be able to show our emotions.
Right.
So we're supposed to really
especially as women, accused.
And our picture of leaders are usually like, we should be poised and, you know, like this picture that somehow we tell the story of what it should be doesn't necessarily always fit.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
So then we have the third group. And I think I said this earlier. I just want to remind you, we all sometimes gravitate to different styles, but there's one that's like, that's your natural, that's your reaction style. And so the third style I like to call the silver linings. And these are our 2 7s and 9s. And they're like, their catchphrase is like, it's fine. Isn't it? Well, like, it's going to be great. And well, at least, you know, and like finding that positive thing within the group, whereas, you know, the cool cucumbers are saying, well, what's the policy? What's the root cause analysis? This group is like, well, at least we learned this. Well, at least, you know, which is, I mean, really, honestly, such a gift. If we all have this, as we're arm in arm, looking at a positive future, like, oh, that helps us get through the struggle. That's actually really helpful. At the end of this, we're going to be able to XYZ positive outcome. You know, isn't that wonderful? And it's because this group does not like to face rejection, feel pain, or feel disconnection. So they're going to do everything to avoid that. And the struggle this group is that it's like they bypass the actual problem solving. It's like a movie montage. We didn't actually do the problem solving. Well, at least, and we just have arrived at this new place. When actually what they've done is created like a Dr. Seuss mound under the rug, and they haven't really addressed the conflict. So what this group does to grow is start to realize that hard conversations are better had the smaller they are. So like starting to have these smaller conversations before it becomes a system-wide issue, or before, because they second guess themselves like, oh, well, I don't want to be that person. Well, at least we'll figure this out. Like those kind of phrases come up rather than a curiosity around, hey, I wonder if we addressed this. Like I'm seeing where this might go. Could we talk about that? It may be nothing, but I'd really like to have this conversation. That's totally like strikes fear into the hearts of silver linings. And that's actually the way through to get to the silver lining that they genuinely can see, that other people might not be able to see. But they, instead of bypassing and shoving it all under the rug, start to actually deal with it. And the only way out is through. It's a little bit like going on a bear hunt. Going on a bear hunt. Can't go under it. Can't go under it. Gotta go through it. When we go through it, like, oh, this is actually the work that gets us what we actually want on the other side. So I'm super curious, as you've listened to me describe the dynamites, the cool cucumbers, the silver linings, what you think you might be your go-to style. You know, tell me in the comments. But so when you know your style, like we've talked about the self-awareness, you have to ask really great questions. And there are tons of different types of questions to ask. But when solving conflict, I like to, because you get real confused. You're like, because your emotions are involved, or you're trying to put your emotions aside, or you're thinking about the positive outcome. Like, how do I then focus to listen well to others? I like to ask questions along what the Enneagram shows us, our centers of intelligence. How do you feel about this? What do you think about this? What do you want to do?
What's bubbling up?
Asking those 3 buckets of questions, feel, think, and do, start to lay out the problem and actually bring the connection you're wanting to help solve that limited resources and differing goals, because you're starting to understand the goals. And then you can become aligned.
That's awesome.
I love that. Just even thinking about, you know, where I play in, but then also conversations with people, right? And how you talked about, like, you know, we all play in these spaces, but even to think about, like, when is it the time that I need to be a cool cucumber? When's the time that I need to remind people that there's a light at the end of the tunnel? And when I need to remind people that, no, we need to show the emotions around food safety, or we need to show the emotion around why it's important to invest in our people, and all those pieces. So, you know, I think Enneagram too, like when you understand yourself in it and you become more self-aware, and you also understand other people and where they fall, then you can start making real decisions, right? Where you can start moving, you know, we talk all the time about food safety culture, so I'll use culture as it. We can start moving the culture forward, or our relationships forward, or the process, whatever it is. You can start moving those things forward, walk hand in hand, right? When you understand those pieces about yourself and about others, and be curious and ask those questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is a gift, self-awareness. And I always go back, and Tia, I don't have it in front of me. I don't know if you remember. Gosh, I'll have to look and maybe drop it in the comments. But there was an organizational psychologist who did a study, and it was one of these where, you know, in a room, hey, who believes they have self-awareness? And right, all the hands go up. But really, in the studies that she had done, found that really only like 95% of us actually have elements of where we are really self-aware. And I share that because I think we'll go, gosh, I know myself well, or I've learned more about myself recently. And I think, you know, I've been on this path, and I'm like, I still have so much more to learn and to understand. And do you find that too, Jen, as you're doing this with clients?
Because things change.
Oh, yeah.
So then we change, and now I have to relearn something, or unlearn something, or find something new that has happened. And I'm going to make a guess that it was Tasha Ulrich, because I love her studies.
Oh, I think that is who it was.
Yeah. She does.
Her name's familiar. Yes.
Yeah. Love. And another is A.W. Church. Both of them just do really great work and around self-awareness work. And we change. I was last night talking to a group about the Enneagram and describing, I was doing this work and like sitting and doing some meditation about something. And I'm like, dang it, that's what that is. I'm afraid of this pain. So my particular Enneagram type is motivated to avoid pain. And I was like, that's what's happening here. And I didn't know that. But the practices of learning how to become more self-aware, of getting curious about ourselves, helped me see that, get it into the facade, and then could talk about it and open and then make some changes around that. It's an ever growing process because we're not static. And that's also what I love about the Enneagram. It's not static. It's a dynamic tool that is, I mean, we have not even thumbnail scratched the surface.
There's so much more to it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And you know what? I know we could talk probably for hours. It has been just delightful to have you on with us and to share with our audience.
Oh, thank you. I've loved being here.
Yeah. And like, as we think about food safety culture and how do we motivate others, how do we become the leaders that we need to be to shift culture, like, you have definitely given, you know, me something to think about, but I'm sure our audience something to think about as they go back, you know, to their work lives and to their teams, to think about, how do I lead a little bit differently to push culture forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I'm so glad.
Yes. Well, and you know, we always like to let our audience know that, right, this is a journey. And that's also why Tia and I are in this space, because we know that it's a journey and you don't have to walk it alone. And the first step of this, our Technical Leader Boot Camp, there's a cohort starting in January, like kicking the year off with diving into honoring yourself and investing in yourself and your leadership through self-awareness, but along with some of these technical things that we like to bring in, like workload capacity. So certainly check that out. But as Jen has shared with us, self-awareness is like the first step to help us really move into this space where when we help ourselves, then we are now positioned to help others and support them.
Absolutely. And so we would love to see you in January. If you want to reach out to us, if you have any questions, we are always available at hello@foodsafetykatalyst.com. Send email, you know, send us what you're working on. We love to get those as well. And check out our website. You can find information about us, about Technical Leader Bootcamp, what we're doing, and to sign up.
Yes. Gosh, thank you again, Jen. It has been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Next, you know, if you're with us next week, feel free to join us again. Same time, same place for Real Talk Food Safety. We will have Master Certified Coach Sarah Kreischer on to talk about improving confidence and credibility.
Yes,
which is
I'm
something as
excited about
food
this
safety
one.
professionals, we always talk about how do we move into that space easier and better. So
Yeah,
we can't wait to share her with you as well.
absolutely. So we will see you all next week, Wednesdays, 12 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Central, to talk about what's happening in food safety.
Yes. Thank you all for
See
joining
you
us.
next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.